give a warm welcome to the hosts of The Bride of Alternate Ending.
Hello, ghouls and goblins, and welcome back to Bride of Alternate Ending. I want to suck on screen. We're doing a vampire movie, and it wasn't very good, and that's why I said that.
I will be honest, I actually was expecting you to go for like a sort of snotty Valley Girl approach.
That would have been a better
Hello, girls
idea.
and goblins. We're here to talk about Buffy.
I think I bring that enough because I grew up close enough to the valley that I do say like a lot. So just let's pretend that impression is spread throughout
Okay.
kind of the entire thing.
I feel at this point that I love that I just said that's exactly where I would go for that. Like as a conversational filler, I think at this point is part of the culture of American English generally. I don't think it's still just the Valley because I say like.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it was the influence of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Obviously, everyone just finally clicked into that situation. Um,
Absolutely. Biggest
I am
biggest hit film in 1992.
absolutely. I am your ghost, Brennan Klein, and with me, as always, is your co-ghost, Tim Brayton. Hi, Tim.
Hello, Brennan.
I mean, I could go with some other Southern California things. I could talk about the Five a lot. I'm sure there's other things
No,
that
I want you to
happen.
lean into this. I want to just be at an absolute loss to understand any of what the hell you're talking about. So just go for it, and I will bullshit my way along if I need to. Although you've already said one thing that I don't know what it's in reference to. So
Are you
very
talking
exciting.
the Five?
The five.
Well, that's how we refer to freeways because so many people in the rest of the world say crazy things like "I'm going to take 210 to my destination." And no, it's like it's the 210, it's the five, it's the 710, etc.
Oh, I gotcha. Okay, that is a distinction. I thank you. No,
You're
because now that
welcome.
you say that, yeah, I would say I'm going to take 94 to Chicago. Yes, yes, I would. I would not say I'm going to take the 94.
Which it corrodes my soul to hear you say such a thing. It just doesn't sound right to me at all. But anyway, we have so much to talk about, so let's stop
Can
talking
I?
about
Well, no, I need
freeways.
to say one just because we're talking about regionalisms that corrode my soul. Anytime I hear
Mhm.
from someone from New England or from the East Coast say they're going to stand online,
Oh
I
my
want to chop
god.
their head off with a sword. I hate
I
that
feel
so
the exact
much.
same way. And that should have at least been altered because online now has a very specific meaning that it didn't
Hmm.
when that phrase was coined. Yes, oh that's so yeah, I
It's
totally agree.
almost certainly my least favorite American regionalism is online. So apologies to our
Oh.
East Coast listeners, but you're pigs, you're depraved wild hogs, and you should be shot down.
Anyway, yes, I mean we will probably have a chance to talk about some Southern California vibes here for many reasons. The reason we have gathered here this month, in the great month of May in the year of our Lord 2024, is that I am halfway through my marathon of Beverly Hills 90210, which has like 300 episodes, and it's taken me years to get this far.
That
And
makes me feel better because I'm about two-thirds of the way through my Star Trek marathon that has about 800 episodes, and I was like, God, why has it taken me so long to watch, you know, 550 episodes of Star Trek? But
when you have other things going on in your life, it's hard to binge a network hour-long drama.
that is part of it. Yes.
Mm-hmm. But anyway, I've been enjoying just. I mean, this started during like kind of lockdown, like mid to late lockdown pandemic era. So it's kind of nice to just be awash in the '90s and in all the dumb problems of people who don't actually have any.
Hmm.
Um, but anyway, I've been really enjoying this first time watch for me, and I thought in honor of being halfway done because it's gonna be years before I see the end of these fucking people. Um, I thought we would do horror movies featuring members of the cast of 90210. Before we talk about this specific movie, I was curious, in what way has 90210 penetrated your life at all? Have you seen a single frame of the show? Are you aware of who's in it? Or your experience of it?
I mean, you could not help but be aware of some of the main actors in it just because there was a very strong wave of 90210 actor shows up here or there or everywhere, either on television or in small roles in big movies or large roles in small movies, which is what we have here.
Hmm.
Um, the only frames I have seen are the ones that show up in this week on 90210 when one is watching other programming on the same channel, which I believe was
Got it.
Fox. Is that
It
correct?
was Fox, yeah.
Okay.
So you were watching what, the X-Files?
Yes. Almost certainly that was the case. I don't think I watched anything else on Fox in the 90s.
Fair
Not a Simpsons
enough.
kid.
Hmm. Or you said you're not a Simpsons kid?
I was not a Simpsons kid in the 90s. No. I have since watched much of it and have enjoyed it, but I would not say it is a crucial part of my soul.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I encountered The Simpsons because I was working a job, a post production job at like a marketing place where I had to transcribe and add metadata to clips of The Simpsons, and that was my full time job for a couple months.
Okay.
So I've seen a hell of a lot of The Simpsons, but that was the context in which I've seen
Sure.
it.
Probably
But anyway,
very conducive to loving it. I mean, and that sounds like a weird tangent, but I will say, uh, generationally beloved shows that I'm sort of like, yeah, that's okay. That might come up again in this episode.
oh, okay. I wonder where. But yes, so yeah, I figured that was kind of your 90210 experience. So because obviously, so we put up the poll on Patreon, and I don't think we have a strong 90210 contingent in the alternate ending kind of community, which does not shock me.
It is unclear to me where a strong 90210 contingent in 2024 would be found.
That is a great question. And that contingent did not show up in 2019 to watch the meta reboot show that they produced. So maybe they have vanished into the woodwork. Um, but anyway, so yeah, because I remember Brian Fowler commented. He was like, I don't even know like most of the people that are on this list, and I was like, Brian Austin
Okay,
Green.
well, I mean, I knew the names on the list, certainly.
Mhm. I mean, I think that the one curveball that I kind of threw in there, just because it was an interesting title, was Joe E. Tata, who plays the guy who owns the diner, the Peach Pit. But yeah, you've got like, you got your Tori Spellings, your Luke Perrys, and then people who kind of didn't go anywhere and maybe should have, like Jenny Garth. But also people who didn't go anywhere and it's totally fine. But anyway, so that's what we're dealing with. We have plucked out one person who did mostly go somewhere, but
I
not
would say
anywhere huge.
probably the person who went the most. Would you say?
Yeah. I mean, I feel like a lot of people found their lane. Um, before I think Tori Spelling is probably the household name that would be most recognized today.
I would agree, but not because her career was admirable.
Correct. It's not like, oh, this Tori Spelling movie from the 2000s
I
is
I
so good.
I think to a certain extent, Tori Spelling got the most exposure because Aaron Spelling willed it to be so.
Yes, that does make sense.
Aaron
But
Spelling
no,
being both her father and the producer of this and other soap operas.
yes. Um, but yeah, no, I think you're right. So we're talking about Luke Perry, who had a kind of late career resurgence. He played the dad of Archie in Riverdale. Um, kind of off the back of what that was doing for him. He showed up for a little bit in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Like he was kind of back on the rise at the time that he passed away in the late 2010s. But I feel like he kind of vanished for a while though. Which will happen.
You know, it is something that happened to most of his co-stars after all. So the fact that he
Yeah.
was able to kind of briefly come back is, I think, testament to doggedness, shall we say.
Yes. Yeah, totally. But yeah, so we're talking about the Luke Perry joint 1992's Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And we do have a little more preamble. Because so Buffy the Vampire Slayer, real quick. Uh, the less we think about Joss Whedon, the better in most cases, because he's just a little nasty man. But he wrote the screenplay for this movie. uh, to hear him tell it, it got really wrested away from him. But he likes to say that about any of his movies that didn't do well.
Yeah, I am, pleased to say, like, I always get annoyed by people who are like, oh, his work was never good after someone gets canceled, because it's like, just fucking calm down. Don't lie. I feel like I have receipts. I have never liked Joss Whedon. And I feel like I can very comfortably say, yeah, Joss Whedon's a bit of a crybaby. And like, you look at what he says about this script, you look about what he says about Alien Resurrection, and it's like, wow, your scripts were such delicate hothouse orchids that if anyone looked at them wrong, they collapsed. Maybe that means you're a bad writer, because a good writer would write a script that could hold up to these cumbersome, clammy hands all over it. And maybe that's a you problem and not a Fran Rubel Kazooie problem.
Yeah, perhaps. Just saying. And I have more of an affinity for like golden era Joss Whedon than you certainly seem to. But I will say, you are not. You're just not on that wavelength from what I can tell. You're not into the Scream movies, which I also am. So I think they're on the same kind of '90s postmodern bent.
No, the
Um,
Kevin Williamson is the John the Baptist to John Whedon's Jesus Christ feels like an arc to me.
Yeah, so I think it is fully in character that you feel this way. I would go to bat for some of his things, although I will say rewatching some of them is just like, okay, I've run out of interest in this. But I think there was a time and a place for a lot of his stuff.
I do. And I will say I do like Firefly. And you know, I think part of the reason that he annoys me is that I think he has had a disproportionate impact. I would say we are still here in 2024 living through a post Joss Whedon. It's certainly a film culture, because I feel like everyone post the Avengers, which he of course wrote and directed in 2012.
mhm.
Uh, I think that is how people write one-liners now, is like they're trying to do Joss Whedon impressions. And I will say this, he's better at being Joss Whedon than virtually anyone else is, and I think that's part of why one-liners are just so bad in American popcorn movies right now.
Oh yeah, no, there's it is a family of one-liners that I'm stealing this whole cloth from another podcast, but they call it well, it's just like, well, that happened. Um,
Oh yeah,
like
it's
that's just
that happened is one of the quintessential versions of that, although I believe that happened actually originates with David Mamet, if I'm not mistaken.
oh, that's
Because
interesting.
the earliest time I'm aware of, well, that happened is in Staten, Maine.
Okay, well, see, that's the thing. If I've seen further, it's because I've stood on the shoulders of giants. Like nothing exists in a vacuum. But I just think it's a good summation of the late decadent spirit of what that kind of humor has
Yeah.
become.
I tend to think of it as the They Fly Now vibe,
Mm.
because of the line, and I believe is it Rise of Skywalker, where they see jetpack mounted stormtroopers, and one character says they fly now, and the other one says they fly now. And it's like, it's a question followed by a declarative sentence, but it's the same three words. Isn't
Ooh.
that a fun play?
Ooh,
And
yeah.
and and sometimes I'm like, why do I watch any movies made after 1939? Maybe I should just stop doing that, because it makes me really unhappy to even think about it. So
Well, you're like the fact that you're hearing dialogue at all is a challenge for you. I know. Um,
they
but
made talkies in the 30s.
I know.
They mostly made talkies in the 30s.
No, I know, but you said before 1939, so that
Yeah,
encapsulates.
that encapsulates the good period of talking cinema.
Mm-hmm. And the very bad period of talking cinema.
Also, the worst period of talking cinema. Yes.
But anyway, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, it eventually transmogrified 5 years later into the landmark show Buffy the Vampire Slayer, starring Sarah Michelle Gellar. A bunch of other people ran for 7 seasons. Doesn't seem like you like the show that much. Have you
Uh,
seen it? How much have you seen? What's up?
I have tried on three separate occasions. The first two occasions stalled out in the middle of season two. The third occasion was going well. I actually think I talked about this in my full review of Buffy the Vampire the Slayer in 1992. got to the end of season 4 and then decided it would be fun to watch Angel simultaneously. Angel being the
Oh.
show's spinoff, and Angel killed the momentum. I think I watched like 5 episodes of Angel, and I was like, I don't want to be in this world. I don't want to bathe in this form of storytelling anymore.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I I've seen all of Buffy. I binged all of it on DVD the summer before I went to college. It was so it was like not necessarily formative, but it was something that arrived to me at a very like pivotal time in my life, and it's something I had a lot of fun with and think about key moments from. Um, it's something that I've considered doing a rewatch on, but I'm not certain that that would pay dividends at all.
It's something that I still feel vaguely guilty about not having watched. It is probably the most formally important and innovative 1990s television show that I have not watched.
Mm.
And that seems, not that I'm a TV historian, it still feels like a lapse. So I will
Yeah.
possibly, when I am done with Star Trek, I might try and make Buffy happen again. I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, no, like I said, it's a network hour long drama. You'll
And
maybe
also
get through those.
I know me, I know that even though I have seen season 1 of Buffy at this point 3 times, I would still have to start at the beginning. And season 1 of Buffy is very, I think.
Yeah. Um Again, I've only seen it the one time. It was enough to get me into the other seasons. But anytime I think about part of that season, I'm just like, oh, that didn't really make sense, or what the fuck was going
Mm.
on? But yeah, so there is that. Um, but yeah, no, I've I did like the show. Would I like go to bat for it in 2024? I don't know. But it was, like you said, formally really innovative, and it
It's one of the big, how do we write an ongoing plot in episodic television shows? It's like you kind of have homicide, then you have I mean not homicide, Hill Street Blues. Then you have Deep Space Nine, then you have X Files, then you have Buffy. And it's you kind of have this like increasing growth, primarily in genre television, of like, what if we told a story that called upon events from earlier episodes and like developed narratives and threats and conflicts, and that was like a big deal. And of course now it's all that TV is.
yeah, and obviously, again, I'm not saying this is the first show to do it, but it's one like kind of shining example that I think a lot of people point to of like you do have like monster of the week episodes, but you have the overarching big bad in a season, so it does feel like things are having some sort of momentum or going somewhere. Um, and I
And yeah,
think that
and that's the big innovation of Buffy, is having each season be a kind of self-contained chapter. That's what Buffy does. Like every other
yeah,
show prior to that was just kind of like fumbling its way to a long form narrative. But Buffy is the one that really kind of codified a good a season level structure for that.
yeah, and I will say, having watched 90210, which is in the kind of like melting pot period where serialized episodic storytelling is changing but hasn't quite solidified, like that the season 3 finale of 90210 is just a clip show. And then they graduate and you're supposed to clap, and it's like, what the fuck was this? But anyway, so yeah, we talked about Buffy a little bit. Time to go back to the misbegotten origins of this I would say beloved show,
I think it
beloved
is
genre show.
absolutely a beloved genre show. It is a show that people still talk about as being very crucial to their sort of growth as a consumer of popular culture. A big part of the reason why Joss Whedon turning out to be a big old fucking bully caused so much strife for people is that they had to reconcile how much they cherished Buffy with what a prick he is, basically.
Yeah, which
Which is
you
not
know
something I have to reconcile. I like it when my artists are big old bullies, but also Joss Whedon, I think, uniquely positioned himself as not that thing.
yeah,
So
which
like
does make it
when you
extra
find out,
challenging.
that Orson Welles is a mean, abusive, arrogant asshole on set, you're like, well, of course he is. when you find out that Joss Whedon is, you're like, but he said all those kind and good things. And it's like, he was lying to you.
Mm-hmm. Yes. No, that is a challenge, especially when you kind of well, because obviously as a kind of cult figure, he had kind of is a real cult of personality with Joss Whedon, where it was like the man himself was like very much the center of
Hmm.
the thing.
And
Anyway, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, 1992.
yes, which is his kind of big first attempt to be a proper writer. He had been a staff writer on a few sitcoms. I know Roseanne was one of the things he'd been a staff writer
Mhm.
for.
Yeah, and a script doctor. I mean, later than this, he was a script doctor, I believe, on Toy Story.
He
He
wasn't
did
even
a
a script
bunch of.
doctor. He had a
Oh,
full
did
on
he?
screen credit
Got it. Got it.
for Toy
Got it.
Story.
Look, the early dark ages of Joss Whedon, I'm not that familiar with, in terms of like I don't
Yes,
have
the
all the
dark
credits at my
ages when he worked on
fingertips.
Toy Story.
uh, anyway, I'm more familiar, at least by name, with what he did after Buffy.
That is fair.
Um, but anyway, so uh, what the what the I mean, okay, the plot. There is a kind of mystical slayer of vampires who is the chosen one. She is reborn as various women throughout the ages. But now it's the early 90s. We're in Southern California. We got Valley Girls. Buffy's a cheerleader. She's the chosen one? How can this happen? How can a ditzy blonde kill vampires? Um
That is
Buff
that is a concise summary of the entire film. Yes.
yeah, thank you. And then there's a whole bunch of characters bouncing around, mostly played by people who for one reason or another. Like this cast is absolutely wild.
Hmm.
But basically, just to kind of give us a grounding to start with, she has a watcher who is assigned to train her. His name is Merrick. He's played by Donald Sutherland. Played as a strong word. Donald Sutherland is on screen, and Merrick is his name in this movie.
It is. Yeah, we'll get to it. We'll talk about Donald Sutherland. You can't not talk about Donald Sutherland in this movie.
Mm-hmm. And then there's also like this older but to an unclear degree, like kind of motorcycle bad boy played by Luke
I
Perry named
Yeah,
Pike.
I could not tease out if he's like a dangerous older boy or if he's just like a high school dropout who is more or less her same age. Like it's very unclear to me.
Oh yeah, very 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 unclear. And it's also very clear that they just had him do Dylan McKay from 90210 but with
Mm.
bangs. Um so he's not really stretching himself, and that's okay. He's not being asked to stretch himself. He's being asked to bring his television personality to the big screen. And that's kind of there's other stuff. So I mean, Rutger Hauer is kind of like the big bad vampire who Buffy needs to defeat, and he has a number two right hand man, major domo guy played by Paul Rubens. Um, and then there's a bunch of other people in this movie, and there's vampires, and we try to attack them or not or
And,
whatever.
and I do think it's worth pointing out that this is the first big screen performance by one Hilary Swank.
It is. I was gonna bring up. I could just kind of rattle through some of the extra people, but yeah, Hilary Swank.
Go ahead.
Given, sorry, what?
No, I thought you were pausing. Go ahead.
Yes, we got Hilary Swank. We got David Arquette as Pike's friend. Another early role. We've got Thomas Jane as the mechanic that Luke Perry works for. Stephen Root as the principal. Ben Affleck as a basketball player who shows up for half a second.
And I will say it is really obvious from that cameo that Ben Affleck has it because he's like one of the most interesting looking people in the entire movie, and all he really does is like grimace when he sees a vampire's face.
Yeah, it's really hard to tell these days if he's kind of drawing your attention because he's Ben Affleck or because it's that, kind of innate thing. But I do think it's that because he does feel like part of just a crowd of people in an action moment, and you look at him. You see him. But yeah, and also not quite so famous, but I believe the first victim who then becomes a kind of prominent teen vampire. He's played by Sasha Jensen, who was in Halloween 4.
Well, there you go. So someone who's already an established star by this point.
Absolutely, he's huge. The Sasha Jensen maniacs all went to the screening on the first night.
I mean, I feel like if in 1992 you were a big fan of Sasha Jensen, you probably did. Both of you.
And a power to you. But okay, so you've seen this movie before. When did you see it first?
Whenever I reviewed it, which I think was 2017,
Okay, so it was very contemporary
it was quite
screening
recently.
for you.
Yes, it was quite
Got it.
recently.
For me, I saw this movie before I ever saw the show, as it was meant to be seen, obviously.
I mean, say
I
what you
had
will, the show calls back to this movie.
it does
Kind
to a
of, kind
degree.
of.
It in kind of like a mushy mouth
It
retconny way.
it calls back to the first draft screenplay of this movie. I believe is
Yes, it
specifically
does.
what it does.
hmm Um, but yeah, so I saw it before the show. I had a friend who was super into Buffy, and she was like, "There's a movie," and I was like, "Okay, yeah, let's watch it. I'll watch this movie with you." And she was perplexed to say the least, but I wasn't because I'd never seen the show. And then when Luke Perry shows up as Pike, she's like, "Okay, so he must be the angel, and he's a vampire." And then I was just like, by the end, he's not a vampire, and I was just like,
It's sure it's
"Why did
not.
we think this?" Um. Anyway, so do you feel like you liked it more than the first time or less than the first time on this rewatch?
I would honestly be inclined to say I liked it slightly less than the first time, although I certainly liked Christy Swanson more.
Oh, should
So
we?
we can unpack some of that, but I'd say that is my broad scale response. Movie worse, good parts better.
Okay, I think that's strong. I think I actually feel pretty much the same way as you. I was kind of hoping that I would kind of unearth a little gem of something of just like because I hadn't seen it since before the show, and now I've seen the show, and I know the whole Buffy phenomenon. And one thing that I've always kind of held to is that this movie and the way that it's shaped is the only thing that actually lives up to the title Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
I agree with that completely.
Thank you. But yeah, because it's the idea of like, oh, it evokes this like ditzy teen valley girl who then has this powerful, incredible responsibility thrust upon her, and the Sarah Michelle Gellar Buffy, while very good and also girly and fashionable and feminine and kind of a lot of the things that are evoked by the title in some way. She is not Buffy the cheerleader, and
No,
that is
this is one of my fundamental complaints about the show. I cannot imagine that version of Buffy ever in her life having been a cheerleader.
yes, exactly. She's just cool.
Yeah.
And that is a very different thing. She's the kind of person who goes to hang out at the Bronze, where all
Yeah,
the like
she
'90s
goes to
alt
the
rock
cool
people are
club.
playing.
She's one of the first people who gets back into vinyl in the early 2000s. Like
Oh, totally.
she is hip. And Buffy the cheerleader from 1992 is most certainly not hip.
Yeah, because
She's fashionable.
yes, oh, totally. Like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, the movie, you can draw a direct line between like it's exactly between Valley Girl and Clueless.
It is
Um,
yes,
yeah, it's
perfect.
just like
Perfect.
on that arc of where culture was moving.
Yep, it is. I would say very much Buffy feels like a movie that it precedes Clueless, it draws from the same bucket as Clueless, and it fundamentally fails to match Clueless in any vague way.
That is the thing. So I was because thinking back about the movie, I was like, okay, so it does deliver on that, or at least it does evoke that. And then when I watched it, I was like, oh, but it's still just not fun.
It's that thing. It's not terribly funny. It's not it doesn't really come up with anything beyond Southern California girls are ditzy and mean. Like that is sort of the entirety of its diagnosis of this cultural milieu. Whereas Clueless, I think, swims in it. Like it's just like really interested. Like who are these people? How do they live? It's a fucked up, weird way they live, but they're still like interesting subjects for a sociological experiment. And Buffy is content to have it just be like, ha ha, ditzy blonde.
Yeah, and I think Clueless loves Cher a little bit. Clueless recognizes that Cher has problems and she needs to resolve them, but it doesn't think that everything she cares about is innately vapid and stupid and bad.
Hmm.
In the way that Buffy the Vampire Slayer
It
does.
surely does. It surely does. Which, which I think is a precursor to because I'm going to enjoy this opportunity to just keep sharpening my knife against Joss Whedon because we don't like him anymore, and I never did. Um, his whole thing, and it annoyed me in the 90s and 2000s, and now I think it's just blown up as like this is why people hate him so much now. His whole thing was like, I'm the only good feminist, ladies.
Yep.
And I think you can already start to see the first signs of what really, really becomes prominent, I think, in Firefly. A lot of his feminism is just like having a kink for skinny girls kicking shit, and
Yeah.
it's not feminism, it's a fetish that he's able to make look like girl power. I think is fundamentally what we're seeing here. But I do think you already begin seeing in Buffy, he's telling us a story that the script very clearly indicates like this is an empowering story about a young woman like figuring things out and being a better version of herself. But it's based in this sort of assumption that the things that she found interesting were obviously bad, and she was obviously a bad person and obviously had to abandon them if she was going to become anything other than just an entitled piece of shit.
Yeah, and it's just really grim because it plays into that thing of like anything that teenage girls like is inherently immoral or vapid or wrong or just bad, and must be thrust aside in order for her to embrace things that might otherwise be perceived as more masculine, like fighting and defending the world and whatever. And it's like, why not both? Which is what I think the show does slightly better. Um, but it's also the show is much more in the sweaty clutches of Joss Whedon, so it does a lot of the same
Yeah, and
issues.
I mean, it certainly could be to his credit that the show does it better, which I think is quite true, as you point out. Although I think also the show, as we've already sort of said, doesn't really start from the place of going to the mall. I mean, it does a little bit, but like the show doesn't start at Valley Girl, is the thing, and
Yes,
the movie does.
yeah, it kind of butches up Buffy a little bit just to begin with. But yeah, anyway, so yeah, that's annoying. But yeah, so it lives up to that title, but it just doesn't come alive at all.
It doesn't. On Letterboxd, you described it as feeling like the movie is stuffed with cotton balls, and I read that and I was like, shit, that is exactly what this movie feels like.
Thank you. Yeah, because it just everything feels like rehearsal footage. Like everyone's kind of marking.
Yeah,
Um,
it's so muted and it's kind of quiet in weird ways, and like no one feels like they're really to go 100% really. Rehearsal footage is a good way of describing it. It really is.
thank you. But yeah, it's just like um, because there are people who are good or have something, they have charisma, and they're but it's just everyone's coasting. I think that the casting is generally pretty well done, and I think that with a different cast, this movie would be considerably worse.
Hmm.
But it's also there's just no energy to it.
Yeah, it's weird because the on paper casting is quite good, and then the performance given by the cast, generally speaking, are not as good as the ones that would have been in my head. Like you tell me Donald Sutherland plays this character, I visualize a certain thing, I'm excited about it, and then I watch the movie. It's not what he does, like at all.
Yeah, I feel like it must have been impossible for him to get a bead on who that character is, because we don't certainly.
No, and apparently he ad-libbed a lot, is something I've been given to believe.
Yes, and certainly something that Joss Whedon would want you to believe very hard.
Yes, well, obviously that as well.
But so you already talked about how Christy Swanson, you enjoyed her performance. Is there anyone else who you felt like did a good job even within the kind of confines of what we're dealing with here?
Very much so. I think Paul Rubens is actively good in this
Hmm.
film. I think he is the thing about this film that is actively unimpeachably good.
Yeah,
He's
I'm very much inclined to agree with you, except for maybe his like most ballyhooed moment. I feel a little weird about.
the death scene.
Yes.
I like the death scene.
Yeah, it's cute. It's just like a
It
little
is
underplayed.
it is a gag that played worse for me the second time through than the first time through, and it was probably the primary reason why I was like, oh, this played better for me the last time through. But I still think it's a fun idea.
It's a fun idea, but like Paul Rubens is a guy who obviously can go big. Um and I wanted it to be like 10% bigger cuz it's more just like ah ooh ah and there's something about the elaborate extension of it that is funny, but I wanted it to be pushed a little more.
I can see that. I can absolutely see that. And I think that's kind of where I was at too, but I still feel there's a lot of different comic registers in this movie. They're not playing nice together. Some of it is kind of mean-spirited satire, some of it's just like 90s sarcasm, some of it's kind of trying to be very like ironic and Whedon-esque. Some of it's just trying to be straight up campy. And he is the part of it that is most successfully campy, I would say.
Yes, but also he's the only part of it that in any way feels threatening to Buffy at the same time.
Yes, agreed.
Because this is a horror comedy and the horror is simply not there. Um,
It does not feel like they made a decision how much they wanted it to be a horror comedy and how much they wanted it to have vampires in it. Because it sometimes feels like they're really trying to amp up the horror, but usually not. And usually it just is like, haha, it's funny because she's skinny and she stabs people with wooden stakes. But like the cemetery scene, the graveyard scene, I'd say feels like it's trying to actually have some
mm,
sort of atmospheric menace to it. As you say, Paul Rubens' performance feels like he's actually a threat in a way. I would also say very narrowly the scene where David Arquette has been turned into a vampire and is floating outside Luke Perry's window, which is a pretty straightforward parody of Salem's Lot.
for sure.
Um, it does at least feel like it's taking seriously the idea that the David Arquette vampire wants to murder Luke Perry.
Yes, I agree with that, but I found that scene so hollow and boring.
Oh, I don't like the scene. I'm just saying it is a scene where it actually does seem to want to be a horror film in some capacity. I find Arquette's performance in this film agonizing, frankly.
Hmm. I don't. I'm not
I
inclined to disagree
generally
with
find David
you.
Arquette agonizing, so that's part of it.
Yeah, no, I like him. I think I mean I like him as Dewey in Scream. I think he does a great job in especially the first two movies of bringing something out that another actor wouldn't have done. Um, but yeah, no, this movie he didn't necessarily bother me other than just like he's playing this like just grossly like chauvinistic guy. Um, but the performance in and of itself, I was just like, all right, that's fine. And he's barely in the movie. Very much a supporting character.
Oh, absolutely.
Um, I will say, okay, so this is a good transition towards talking about Luke Perry, who is ostensibly
Well,
the reason we're here. To what?
it is. But before we do that, are there any performances that you liked? Because you asked me, but I did not. I did not throw it back to you. Or are you about to
Got
do
it.
that and talking about Luke Perry?
I mean, maybe a little bit. So I mean, like I said, I think Luke Perry is coasting. I think he's doing the thing that they expected him to do because he's been playing Dylan McKay for 2 years, and he's just like motorcycle leather jacket kind of bad boy brooding guy. I will say an interaction between Arquette and Perry, where David Arquette's like making like a kind of classic '90s. It could have been a gay panic joke where he's like, "I'm so drunk, I'd sleep with you," and instead of Luke Perry going, or instead of Pike going, "Ew, gross," he's like, "Well, then you wouldn't call me anymore if we did sleep together," and I was just like, that was a good way to handle that joke in 1992,
Sure.
and I really liked that. Um, but anyway, I do like Luke Perry's performance. I think when he's interacting with men, he's not that interesting in this, but when he meets Buffy, he really comes alive. I think he knows how to charm a woman on screen, especially in the early 90s when he looks like early 90s Luke Perry. And I also think he had what was for me the funniest performance moment in the movie, which was he's saying a line as he's passing out after being attacked by Paul Rubens. And I thought that actually worked. It was like a very good physical comedy moment, very good general like line delivery.
Sure. I would say I am not as warm towards his performance as you are, although I don't think he's a problem by any stretch of the
No.
imagination. I think and I say that because I think a lot of actors are. In terms of this actor is doing something that is lazy for them. Rutger Hauer is also doing that, and he's like ruining the movie. I think Rutger
He
Hauer
kind
is,
of
is among the,
is.
the single biggest problems with this film. Whereas Luke Perry is just kind of benign. He's like, oh, he's there. He's cute. He only needs to be cute. He needs to plausibly convince me that Buffy would feel a certain way. And that's really all he needs to do in the film. And it's to me, it mostly falls on Christy Swanson to have to sell that anyway, because that's what the film is. But
Mhm.
yeah, Luke Perry does not harm the movie. Other people harm the movie.
Yeah, no, Rutger Hauer's just not that interesting, and we're only 6 years off from The Hitcher, um, and then obviously he's played other great creepy or villainous roles, but this is not one of them. Um,
No, and it's a bummer because Rutger Hauer is a sort of Dracula stand-in. Feels like a good call, and it just
it
doesn't
is,
play.
and didn't he play Dracula in the Dario Argento Dracula 3D?
He sure did. Wow. So apparently Rutger Hauer playing Dracula is a terrible idea with a faultlessly bad hit rate, and I should reflect on what I've just said. God, he does. Oh man, that movie's shitty. Thank you
Yeah,
for reminding me.
you're welcome. Um, so that I for some maybe it's because he's like I know how to do this or something because it's just so obvious that it should work and it just doesn't.
Yeah, and it's
It's
like I don't know how much of it is boredom and how much of it is he thinks he can do funny, but he can't, so he's just kind of faffing about like an asshole. But it's wrong. It's just such a wrong performance. It's so insincere. It doesn't feel dangerous in any capacity, but it's also not like fun. It's not like witty or clever or anything. It's just so flat. I hate it.
yeah, no, it's just not good. Anyone else who you didn't like? You not a fan of Arquette or Hauer?
Um, I mean, Sutherland is kind of in his own weird pocket universe of you stepped in here from a very different movie
Mm-hmm.
and I have no idea what's going on. But in a way that kind of fits because the whole idea of his character is that he's centuries old and has memories of all those centuries and or whatnot. He's reborn, but he has memories of all those centuries. And uh and he's just this weird alien presence and he feels like a weird alien presence. So is it bad? I don't know. It kind of works. I don't like it, but it kind of works.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that Stephen Root really, really disappointed me.
That's interesting. He barely made an impression on me in this movie.
See,
What
Stephen
about him did you
Stephen
not like?
Stephen Root is someone that I'm like here for. Like he is one of my
Mm.
bad guys. And he's trying to play this kind of shticky idiot principal, like very stock character in American teen comedies. The guy who keeps talking like he knows what's going on and he's trying to provide a good, whatever to the students, but is just bad at it. And I don't know, he never got dialed into the role or something, but it's so forced and he's like he's missing all of the punchlines. I'd have to like really sort of work on that performance specifically to explain why it bothered me so much, but it did, and I think it bothers me especially because I have expectations for Stephen Root. Like I'm expecting Jimmy James from News Radio, and I see that Stephen Root is playing this role in 1992, and it comes nothing close to that. Like it's just so thin and uninteresting, and like I feel the one place where I'm absolutely willing to give Whedon like his due, and he'll always say like, "Yeah, the actors didn't know how to read my lines." And it's like, well, that's sorry, buddy. Stephen Root, I think, is one person where it's very clear that he didn't get the script and is trying to
Mm.
muscle his way through it. And so that's the one place where I'm like, yeah, if a better performance could have had salvaged the version of this character as written, but Root is not doing it.
Yeah, and that's a bummer. Um, I don't. Yeah, I don't know. Just that character just didn't. I think that character is hit with a lot of the like just flattest, most oxygen free moments in the movie in many cases,
Hmm.
because he is so supporting and it doesn't pay that much attention to him. But let's talk about Christy Swanson. We've kind of circled around that. So you feel like she is kind of pulling a lot of these disparate elements together.
I think so. I think that a there is a really unformed character here. Like there's a character arc, right? The character is very clearly uh she used to like malls and jackets. Now she likes saving the world and fighting vampires. Like that's
Mm-hmm.
clearly the story here. Uh, but I don't know that there's a character underneath that arc necessarily. I also think that there's a really clear problem where the director and the writer are not trying to make the same movie. And I think that's again something that Whedon has sort of talked about, but you can feel it even just looking at it.
Mm-hmm.
Like it is not being directed in any of the ways that I think would make the script is messy, right? Like it's a weird script that has a lot of like bad ideas in it. But I think there is directing that could have made it land, and this directing does not because it's not going for it. It's not like trying to really lean into the big bouncy comedy of it that I think is how it should have been handled to save it.
Mm-hmm.
So you have a film that's just like this collapsing mess, and Christy Swanson certainly does not salvage that collapsing mess, but she does give us a singular Buffy, and I think that goes a long way because the script is not. I don't think. I think the script gives us two different Buffys,
Mm-hmm.
and she has found a way to make them feel plausibly like the same person.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you, and there's she's able to play both sides of the character pretty well. I think she does a good kind of. I mean, I guess she's doing Deborah Foreman and Valley Girl. She can't be doing Alicia Silverstone and Clueless, but I think she does a good version of that thing. Um, I think where she's like, "Oh my God, that teacher, he wants us to study history, but he has no sense of history. He wore a brown tie." Like, I think she sells lines like that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then also, I think there's like a kind of more somber kind of bonding moment between her and Merrick that happens at his weird mansion where he
Mm-hmm.
lives, question mark. I think she really sells that too. Um, Neither of them really sell his weird death scene, but that's neither here nor there.
No, and I think, it speaks to the fact that she does, I think, sell that bonding because that's a where the character art happens for her is based
Yeah.
on that character, is based on Merrick. And Sutherland's not giving her anything. Like she is making those scenes work by herself. And I think they do work.
Yeah, no, they do. And I appreciate that. And it's nice when there's a glimmer of anything in this movie.
Exactly.
um, I thought some of the other like Valley Girl satire stuff was kind of funny, or at least it was funny in a way where it's like, oh, we're really trying to make this weird lingo happen. I think two of the worst examples are "take a chill" lozenge and "get out of my facial," which
Get out of my facial was such a terrible line that I rewound to make sure I heard it correctly.
it is brutal. And do they make Hilary Swank say that one? Is that's her,
I
right?
think that is correct.
Yikes.
This
Poor.
movie this movie is very hard to Hilary Swank. Like she has the least playable character of the Valley Girls, I think.
Yes, and oh my god, that really weird moment where Stephen Root like knocks her out by slamming her against the wall is
Right?
that does not belong in this
I
movie.
have no idea what that scene is. It is a beat from a very different kind of comedy.
Yeah, and a comedy that needed to be a lot more Looney Tunes to begin with to
Exactly.
sell that
Especially
moment.
when she does that like huge, like cross-eyed googie face look as she's like sliding down the wall unconscious. Like
Yeah.
nothing else in this movie is that. And it's really bad.
Yeah, that was woof. Um but anyway, Hillary. So a lot. There's a lot of weird connections to 90210 that aren't Luke Perry, because Hilary Swank did star on a season of 90210 like 5 or 6 years after this. And David Arquette also appeared on an episode of 90210 a year after this movie came out as the abusive boyfriend of someone that Brandon was trying to date.
Okay.
But the very weird thing that's going on is that the school where they shot Buffy in the show is the same school where they shot 90210, the same high school.
Oh, I did not know that. That's interesting.
It is, and it's in Torrance, and I drove past it all the time because I used to work in Torrance, and it's very cool. It's very pretty, that school. But the school from this movie is the school from A Nightmare on Elm Street.
Huh. I didn't know that either. Interesting.
Yeah, it's this big kind of
I'm gonna have to go back
gorgeous.
and rewatch Elm Street.
Yeah, it's this gorgeous kind of red brick facade, and it's one of the rare Los Angeles area high schools that is, kind of contained in one building, and not a bunch of like flat land with a one-story classrooms that exit to the outside.
Right.
So they use it in a lot of things. But the second they walked up to that high school, I was like, wait a minute. I've seen Nancy and Johnny Depp running around there.
Mm.
But yeah, so there's a lot of these weird kind of ways that it's kind of interstitial between all these different kind of pop culture vectors.
I love that. That's incredible.
Yeah. Anyway, just a little fun fact. Is there anything else you liked about this movie?
Um, I like the hook, but I think that's kind of implicit in what we've been talking about. But I think it's a good hook. I do actually, for all I'm saying, like, oh, it is definitely like weirdly mean compared to something like Clueless. I don't mind the mean humor, and I think that's the only time it's actually funny. Like, I think that first act where it's really just kind of exulting in the shallow lives of Buffy and her friends, it lands some punches, I think.
Yes. Totally. Or like the where they're trying to come up with the like environmental theme for the dance, and someone is saying like we could put the earth and say don't tread on me, and it's like, but you kind of have to tread on the earth.
No, that's a good
That stuff kind
scene.
of works.
I like the business with the yellow jacket.
Ooh,
Partial,
that's yeah.
partially just because it's like what a 90s thing to be excited about, a fucking hideous yellow leather jacket. But I think that's like weirdly good character stuff because it's like the film doesn't really tell us what to do with it. It just sort of accepts that we understand why it's a betrayal to
Yeah, of
have one
course.
character tell the other character don't buy this jacket and then buy it herself. Like that's it's subtle-ish.
Yeah. And then and that is actually some pretty good writing because she's like, it's so 2 minutes ago. And then when Buffy's like, I thought you said it was 2 minutes ago. And she's like, well, yeah, now it's retro.
That's good. That's a good line.
That
That's
is
the
good.
one good line that has been given to Hilary Swank.
Oh yeah. Oh, poor woman. She got whatever she needed out of her career
Yep.
and is continuing to. She was in that Ordinary Angels movie. That was her being
Yep.
all Christian and whatever, right? Yeah. Okay.
Yes, I have a friend who sort of knows the industry a little bit who speculates that her between her and her agent, she is unwilling to take anything other than lead roles, and those lead roles are not presenting themselves, so she has to like go to the world of Christian cinema to find any lead roles.
Hmm.
It's sort of
That
better to
makes a
reign in
lot of
hell than serve in
sense.
heaven, sort of thing. But
Yeah.
but the opposite.
Yeah, exactly. No, that makes a lot of sense. Because otherwise she could just, like it's kind of this like weird underbelly of pop culture that stars who have had their day, they end up in so many different places. Like, but she could have ended up in just like where Vivica A. Fox is, just making this endless series of Lifetime movies,
Right.
and she's found her niche and it was
She's found her
somewhere
niche,
other than that.
but it's like I mean, she's definitely like two-time Oscar winner. She could absolutely be doing like villain in MCU films, but apparently she's
Hmm.
uninterested in taking those kinds of roles.
Got it. Well, I mean, the MCU is kind of poison right now, so
Right now,
that
but I
might be
mean,
the
it
right
that
move.
that's a new development.
It is. I'm so excited about it.
It makes my heart sing.
I love watching that big golem. Somebody has taken out the scroll that is controlling it, and it's kind of crumbling back into mud, and I like it.
I don't know if you saw Variety's list of the flops of 2023 when they calculate like how much did all the big flops make or lose rather.
No, I
Uh,
haven't.
we can now confidently and officially say that The Marvels is the biggest bomb in history.
In history?
In history. Not adjusted
Shit.
for inflation. Not adjusted
Okay.
for inflation, but in constant dollars, it lost 230 some million.
Oh my god. I mean, it sucks that it's that one because it's led by women and directed by a black woman, and that's never good when those movies fail. But like, it was positioned at the exact moment that Marvel did not need. Marvel was already crumbling out from beneath it.
Exactly.
Oh, that's fascinating. And then because like Marvel put out that show Echo at the beginning of the year, and I heard
Mm-hmm.
literally zero people talk about it.
Right.
It's such a thrill. Anyway, anything else about Buffy before we wrap up?
Uh, nothing that leaps to mind. We've sort of touched on it, and I've actually said it now in, I believe, two separate letterbox posts and possibly also in my full review. But I just want to go on record. I'm gonna light everything on fire and burn it to the ground and say that I actually like Christy Swanson's interpretation of Buffy more than I like Sarah Michelle Gellar's.
Hmm.
I think it is a more I should temper that. I think she is playing a more interesting character who goes through a more enjoyable transformation to me.
Well, that's fair. Well, oh, you haven't seen all of Buffy, but I don't know that I would call Buffy's character arc enjoyable on the show. I think she starts at a very fun place, and they just give her more drama to play. And I think Sarah Michelle Gellar is a very talented actor. But I think I see what you're saying in terms of like the character and the dynamic.
I to me, and part of the reason I could never get into the show, I mean, a big part of the reason I couldn't get into the show is I just didn't like the characters, and I actually don't like Sarah Michelle Gellar. I've never liked her in anything, but I I feel like Buffy is the canvas upon which the show happens, and all of the interesting stuff is the characters around her, but she's sort of the like the anchor, the center to it. And
Mm-hmm.
this in a certain extent deprives her of being able to do what Christy Swanson is doing here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I see that.
And as we touched on, this Buffy feels like someone who is the title character in a product called Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And
Yes,
and
which
Sarah
which is
Michelle
not
Gellar does
nothing.
not. It's not nothing. She feels like her character is insufferably cool, and Buffy's are not insufferably cool.
Yes, yes, very much, very much. That yeah, it just can't. That's just not right. Um, sorry, I was just thinking again about how. Sorry, I'm just totally out of my mind, but I'm pretty sure in the movie April Fool's Day, Deborah Foreman, the star of Valley Girl, I think she plays a character named Buffy,
There
and I
is
want to double
definitely a
check.
character named Buffy in April Fool's Day, but I don't remember which one it is. I just know for a fact. I think Buffy is the one who owns the island that they're visiting.
Yeah, yeah, which is Deborah Foreman.
Okay.
She plays spoiler alert, she plays twins, Muffy and Buffy. So she does play Buffy, which is just more anyway, I'm my corkboard is almost complete, all of the strings connecting. But anyway, I'm tapped out about talking about this movie if you are.
I got nothing to say. It's a weird moment in pop culture. Glad to see that Joss Whedon has fallen from grace because I don't think he's a good writer, basically.
Yeah, and I'm also not mad about it. I think he had his time, and I think I like quite a few things from his time. But we're done, and that's okay. Um, next week is going to be completely different from what this was.
Because we don't do an episode next week, but in two
Well,
weeks.
okay, shush, shush. In 2 weeks, when we come back, we are going to be covering another 90210 actor in a movie, but we're going back to 1977. This is the reason we put Joe E. Tata on the list at all. It's going to be a much different feeling than like, wow, we're seeing a big TV star slumming it in a movie that isn't that good. We are going to be watching the kind of quasi slasher Sisters of Death, which does feature Joe E. Tata in a supporting role. I have hopes that this will continue our trend of stumbling onto these kind of like late 70s gems that we have done with with Death Game and it was the little girl who lives down the lane,
Little
I
girl,
think
yeah,
is what I'm
yeah.
thinking, which was early 70s. So just 70s
But
in
still,
general.
70s in general. 70s in general.
I'm kind of hoping we get a little bit of that, but we'll find out in 2 weeks.
Yeah, it'll be fun. Big that guy character actor. He was on like every TV show that was on the air in the 60s and 70s. And
Very much. Like 90210 was very much the end of his career rather
yes.
than kicking off
and
anything.
and it will be great because that will give me so many opportunities to say show us your tatas on our episode in
I'm
2 weeks
I'm
time.
I'm very excited about that. I cannot wait. But yes, until then, you can find more episodes of this show and other podcasts, other reviews and whatnot at alternateending.com. Thanks so much for listening. Bye bye.
She ate me.